We're now standing at, this is Mount Street Bridge. It was the location that witnessed the highest British Army casualties during the Easter Rising. It involved at one stage, there was 17 volunteers and they were up against, there was 2,000 British soldiers. There's different sort of numbers, but you're talking, there was around 234 killed and injured at this location. Against a very small number of volunteers. The person in charge of these outposts here was a guy called Mick Malone, and all of the volunteers involved here had been sent from Bolands Mills, from the garrison there. Mick Malone, what they did was they came along here and they knew that this was one of the locations that the British Army were going to have to come to get into the city. So they had a couple of locations. One was this here, which was the schoolhouse. Another one was Clanwilliam House. So this new office block, there was an old house there called Clanwilliam House, and it sort of jutted out. And just what's important later on in the story is the angle that this building has towards the road, towards this road behind you. They had two other locations. The other location was across the road, the parochial house. So that you can't see it, it's actually behind that red brick building there. There was 4 volunteers in there, in the parochial house, and right down at where the traffic lights are down there, the very last house, which is number 25 Northumberland Road, that house was held by 2 volunteers, Lieutenant Michael Malone and Seamus Grace. So there was just 2 of them in the house there. There was 4 in the parochial house, there was 4 in the schoolhouse, and then there was 7 in Clanwilliam House. For some reason, during the week, the volunteers that were in the schoolhouse here actually left and went back to Bolands Bakery, which meant that there was only the 3 locations. The first action that the volunteers saw was on the Monday. So Michael Malone came around here with his volunteers. He took up, as I say, number 25. There was also 4 Nafina members with them, but because of their young age and because of the reports coming of the number of troops that were actually heading this direction, Michael Malone ordered the 4 Nafina boys to leave and he sent them home. So they barricaded the different buildings. The information that the British had was that this was the main location, and this is actually where they attempted to attack, and they didn't know about the other locations. On the Monday, the first action was actually down at the traffic lights there. There was a group of I think it was the Home Guard British Army who were coming back from manoeuvres, and they were heading for the barracks. There's a barracks just to the left. When you go down to the traffic lights here and go left, there's a barracks called Beggars Bush Barracks, and a small group of, I suppose, auxiliary or Home Guard British soldiers were heading back to the barracks, and Michael Malone and Seamus Grace opened fire on them at that junction there. They managed to kill and wound a number of them. Residents in the area, some of them came out and managed to get them back up to the barracks. It wasn't until Wednesday that the main British Army who had landed at Dun Laoghaire actually arrived here. So from Monday to Wednesday it was very quiet in the area, there wasn't much happening. But there would have been regular reports of the numbers of British troops that were coming. It was the British troops were the Sherwood Foresters. They came in 2 lots of 1,000 each. So they made their way down the road here, came through the traffic lights with the objective of the schoolhouse. Michael Malone and Seamus Grace opened fire on them, and the British troops then attacked that house. The 2 of them held off the British troops, caused significant casualties. At the same time, the volunteers in Clanwilliam House would have been shooting. They had a line of sight straight down the road. So as you can imagine, like if you go back 100 years, the trees that are surrounding you would have been a lot smaller, so the cover would have been a lot less. So you had the British troops scattering to the stairs of the houses, behind walls and that, and not knowing where they were being shot at. They also had the 4 volunteers in the parochial house. Any of them that made it past number 25 would have been shot from there. So it caused a serious amount of confusion amongst those troops. The British troops themselves Many of them actually, when they arrived in Dun Laoghaire, actually thought they were in France, because they weren't told where they were going. They were just given 24 hours notice. They were put on boats, on troop ships, and they were brought. And when they arrived in Dun Laoghaire, they actually didn't realise that they were in Dublin. Obviously, they soon realised that they were, but right, I've lost my train of thought now. Yeah, so sorry, in Northumberland Road, number 25, Michael Malone and Seamus Grace. You know, I suppose another thing as well with the volunteers that were based in the locations here, the guns that they had compared to the British were, you know, they were very badly equipped. Some of the guns were the guns that were brought in from Holt, and I think it was 1894 Hausers, or Mausers was the type of gun, and these rifles had a huge recoil on them. They also took quite a big shell, and for many of the volunteers, it was their first time firing these weapons. And you know, there are a number of accounts. I think one of the volunteers in Clanwilliam House was knocked unconscious the first time he fired a gun because he was thrown back against the wall. Woke up a couple of hours later. In the main, they had a few revolvers, a couple of rifles each, against a significant force. One saving grace for them was that the British, for some reason, had left their machine guns back in England. The machine guns hadn't been put onto the boats, which meant that the British troops themselves just had their rifles. So what happened then at Northumberland, number 25, the British kept attacking the building. And they managed to go around the back, a laneway called Percy Place, and they surrounded the building. The building was eventually on fire, and Seamus Grace called out to Michael Malone, who was up the top, that they needed to get out. Michael Malone came down the stairs with his pipe in his mouth and his gun in his hand, and the British troops had come in the front door and shot him as he came down the stairs, and he died on those stairs. Seamus Grace was in the basement. He hid behind a metal stove as the British troops decided to clear the building, and they just threw hand grenades into every room. Seamus Grace miraculously managed to escape. He made his way out the back, down onto Bagot Street, and he stayed in the area for 2 to 3 days, and he continued to snipe at the British troops in the area. And he lived to a ripe old age of, you know, into his 70s. And his recollection of his time in Northumberland Road is available online on the Military Archives website. So after they had taken over Northumberland Road, they made their way up. Again, they were making for the schoolhouse, and they couldn't work out where the other firing was coming from. The 4 volunteers in the parochial house fought to their last bullet. When they'd fired their last shot, they tried to get out the back, but they were surrounded and they were arrested. One of them was quite a fiery Republican by the name of Joe Clark, who many people may know. Joe Clark famously protested and was ejected from the Mansion House in 1966 when he stood up in the Mansion House to protest in relation to the Free State government, and he was put out of the Mansion House. I think Joe died in 1976 or so, but remained a Republican up until his death. So then in Clanwilliam House here, you had 7 volunteers. A report at the time said that the rebels poured fire into the troops with devastating effect. As one soldier was killed, another crawled over or around him, only to be halted himself. The entrance to the bridge, which would be just here, the entrance to the bridge became a mass of dead and wounded soldiers. Again and again, an officer would step up and lead a few men in a charge over the bridge, and again they would be shot down, falling in a heap of bodies on the bridge. So, as you can see, it was an amazing sort of sight of devastation. The British troops had come down around, and they were coming up and hiding behind the walls along here. Some of the witness statements from the guys that fought there talk about being able to, shooting the soldiers as they came up along here, about the amount of bodies that were lying here. Now, during the fighting, there were a couple of ceasefires, and that allowed staff from Sir Patrick Dunn's hospital, which we passed actually when we were coming up, and they came along and retrieved the wounded and brought them back to the hospital down there. Clanwilliam House, eventually they made it to the door of Clanwilliam House. Clanwilliam House ended up on fire. So the the volunteers that were left in the building were in a precarious state at that stage because the whole place was on fire. They were surrounded, and the British troops at this stage now had gathered, and there was grenades coming in the windows. The volunteers were running short on ammunition. Surprisingly enough, there was only 3 of the volunteers died in Clanwilliam House. The remains were never found because the building was so badly burnt. The other 4 actually escaped, despite the huge numbers of British troops in the area. Another thing to take into account with Mount Street Bridge, the trees again on this side would have been much smaller, and Clanwilliam House received supporting fire from the troops that were in the bakery and that were on the railway bridge. There was railway works down the end here, and there was volunteers up on the roof there, and they were also providing supporting fire down along the canal. So yeah, I suppose it's an area, if you look today, you wouldn't know the devastation and the heroism of the Republican volunteers in 1916 at this location, and the lesson that they taught the British troops. This was one of the first times that the British had this experience in an urban setting. The officers insisted on bayonet charges, and that accounted, the stupidity of their own officers accounted for the huge casualties. The only memorial is the one across where the lads are with the banner. That memorial was put up, I think, sometime in the 30s, and the money for that was raised by individuals who had been involved in the battalion in this area. They raised the funds themselves, and that memorial was put there. Apart from that, there is a small memorial outside 25 Northumberland Place to Mick Malone, who was killed down there. But apart from that, you wouldn't have any knowledge of the amazing events that took place here. Some people reference this location as being the Irish Thermopylae, and that would be a reference to the 300, the fight between the Spartans and the Persians.